Hello and welcome back to DJFonts tutorials. Today I'm going to be showing you some of the text commands, the text controls for DJFonts in the juicer. Now I'm using a pre-release version of the juicer, so there might be a few differences once DJFonts are released and you get your new updated version of the juicer, but for the most part things should be almost identical to what you're seeing here. I'm also going to touch a little bit on the changes to the juicer interface because of Digital Juice Fonts, and I'll explain some of those to you. The font you're looking at here is from the Heavy Battle font family, and this is one of the preset looks that we provide for you in the standard DJ fonts for that font family, and it's called Broken Taillight. So starting over here in the left corner, actually starting here in this Canvas tab, when you see this black area in the background of your preview pane, that is the Canvas area, and for that you define that here in Canvas: width, height, and resolution. And your width and height can be in pixels, inches, centimeters, or points, and your resolution is in pixels per inch or pixels per centimeter. Usually you're going to use DPI, which is pixels per inch. And if we look at what I've got here, I've currently got 1000 pixels by 1500 pixels at 300 DPI. To see how much that would be in inches, we can just go up here and change pixels to inches, and we see that it's about 3.33 by 5 inches at 300 DPI. Now if we come back over here to the preview pane, you see up here Show Bounding Box is a button you can click on, and that is the area within the canvas in which your type can appear. You can resize that bounding box horizontally, vertically, and your text will only appear within that area. And there's a couple of ways you can control this besides moving the handles. You can also move it around just by clicking and dragging. You can change its position over here. This little icon here, position, if you click and drag within these number boxes, you'll move left and right and up and down. And we have a number of different ways to reset that bounding box. If you click here on the right of the position command, that will reset the position of the bounding box. And over here there's a command to reset the bounding box, and what that will do is set the bounding box to be the exact same size as the canvas. Now within that text bounding box, you can also set margins for where your text can fall on the left and the right, and those are here under the margin command. You can click and drag within these. Left margin can go anywhere from 10 up to 250, and right margin again can limit it how far it can go within the bounding box. That's useful if you've got your bounding box set to the canvas size and you want a set margin around so that your text doesn't go outside the box or outside your canvas. Now at the top of this panel here, you'll see some familiar tools. This is the Justify Left, Justify Centered, and Justify Right control. So if I select my text, it's currently left justified, Control-Shift-L. If I click here, it'll center within the bounding box, and if I click here, it will right justify within the bounding box. And one thing to note is when you're switching back and forth from controlling the position and size of the bounding box to actually editing your type, if you click outside the area of the bounding box, that automatically puts you into the editing bounding box mode. And you can either double click inside the bounding box to get back into text mode, or you can also come up here to this little icon here. which will put you automatically into editing mode. Now before I get into what each of these text controls does, there's one more option up here that you need to know about, and that's the text formatting palette can be moved from the panel here at right to showing as a toolbar across the top. Now that gets it out of the way of the image you're working on. It's a little bit less explanatory because you don't have the names of the tools. So once you're familiar with them, this is a good way to go to keep your work area neat and clean. But when you need to know what you're doing, this is a lot clearer, so you can see exactly what the controls do. You can also turn the text formatting controls off altogether just by clicking on this button here. Once you've got your text formatted, you don't need it anymore. So we're going to turn that back on. And the first thing you will usually want to do is decide how big you want your text. And that's here in the font size control. And there's a little arrow to the left of the font size control here. If you click on that, it will open up the option to scale your type by percentage of the maximum overall size, as well as allowing you to scale it using points or pixels. There's also some preset sizes here if you click the drop down arrow. And as with most of these controls, you can click in the number areas and just drag left or right to do your scaling. The way I usually will scale type is to come into the percentage area here and just drag left and right. The next text formatting tool that we need to look at is tracking. And tracking and kerning are similar, but one way to look at them is as being global and local. The tracking is usually done on a global basis on characters in words and lines, and that adjusts the spacing between the characters, but it uses the same amount of space between all characters, and that's not always what you want. Now, kerning is a more local effect, and it will adjust the spacing between two individual characters. So if you put your cursor down in between the B and the I here, for example, and close up the space, it's a way of fine-tuning the tracking that you've done on a global basis. Now, as an example, let me reset the kerning and tracking on this word, and you can tell that the spacing in between the I and the G appears smaller visually than the spacing between the B and the I, and that's because of the shape of the letters. The shape of the B gives more visual space here in between those two letters, and that's why you're usually going to need to fine-tune tracking. So if I come in here and close up those spaces to a point where the I and the G look right, I still need to fine-tune the distance between the B and the I, and to do that I'm just going to go in here and kern it just a little bit closer. Now for all of these commands, on the right side here there's a reset button which will shift your values back to 0. And for all of these input boxes, you can also see that there's pop-up help that shows you the keyboard shortcut for doing what we're doing in this text panel. Now after tracking and kerning comes leading, which is otherwise known also as line spacing, and that's the distance between two lines of text, the vertical distance between two lines of text. So between big and dog, for example. And if I reset that to 0, you can see that that's quite a large space between the two. And I'm going to want to reduce that, and you're always pretty much going to want to reduce that. Now any two lines of text are going to need a different amount of line spacing or leading. And for example, this third line here underneath Big Dog, That's a smaller typeface, smaller size. So the distance between dog and mean, if you select the two lines, is going to be smaller than the distance between big and dog. So you're going to have to decrease it even further from what the other two were. And that's the way you adjust the leading, is to select the two lines of text that you want to affect and go in here and shift your values left or right. And the last text formatting command here is baseline shift. And that's usually used on a per character basis to shift the baseline of one character up or down in relation to the others. You can use it on a global basis to shift a whole block of text up or down, but that's really what the leading or line spacing is for. And to show you an example of how you would use that, I'm just going to retype this top block in lowercase characters. Actually in upper and lowercase. And then I'm going to shift the baseline of the O and the G here of dog upwards in relation to the D. Now obviously I need to do some size adjusting here to make that look right. And as you scale, you will have to redo your baseline shift. So that gives the text block a completely different look, but it's very useful for creating logos and for doing text blocks with a little bit more visual interest. Another way you might want to use baseline shift is if you have some characters with different sizes. For instance, if I take these two characters and make them smaller, even though they're uppercase, then I can change the baseline shift on those so that they're centered on the bigger first character. For example, if this was a movie poster logo, you've already got something a little bit more interesting than just typing the text as it was. So that's a little bit how baseline shift works and what it's used for. Now, in the general interface here, there are a few other things that I need to explain. At the bottom here we have undo and redo, and undo will do your last action for the text in the text block. Here, this is the quality of the preview that you're using. Right now I have mine set to using medium resolution preview. You can also use a low resolution preview, which will speed up your refresh time a little bit. Or you can set it to auto preview, and that will be based on the font size. You can also use draft preview, which will make your characters white, and that will be the fastest method altogether, which is useful for when you're just doing text formatting to get the look right, and then you can go back to using the medium resolution to see the textures and effects. Next to the preview options is the background color. Now these presets of black and white and also of the checkerboard pattern that's common in Photoshop, and then also you can select whatever color you want. So if you know what color your text is going to be falling on, let's say it's a bright blue or a bright red, it gives you a chance to see what your text is going to look like when you use it in your layout. And next to the background color command is the hand tool. The hand tool is for moving your canvas around within the preview panel. So for example, if you in the next section over, if you change your resolution up to 300% or 200%, then you would use the hand tool to pan around within your canvas to see your individual letters. So let's go ahead and reset that. You have a number of zoom options here, all the way from 6.25 up to 1600%, but usually you're going to want to keep that on fit, which will fit it to the canvas exactly. Fit the canvas rather to the preview panel size exactly. Let's go ahead and switch the color back down to a dark blue. And one final thing up here in this section that you need to be aware of is the all glyphs icon at the top here. Now what that does is it shows you all the characters in the font that are available to you, and it's useful for finding characters that you don't know how to type on your keyboard, accents and special characters like copyright or the registration symbol, those kinds of characters. And you just select them and then say OK, and it will insert them into your canvas, and you can format them from there however you want. I'm going to undo that. Now one last thing that's new in this version of the juicer is some of the output options that you have for DJFonts. The format that you can output the fonts in runs from PNG, JPEG, Targa, TIFF, a PSD which is merged in a PSD file, bitmap, and layered PSD. Usually you're probably going to want to use layered PSD if you're going to do any further formatting in Photoshop or in After Effects. And when you do, there's a further icon here which when you click gives you the options for what kind of layered PSD you're going to create. You have the option of each word in a separate layer, each character in a separate layer, or each phrase in a separate layer, or all of them merged onto a background, the color background that you've chosen. And you can also tell the juicer whether you want to preserve the sublayers. Now what that means is over here when you're editing the font and the effects, it will preserve all of these effects layers in Photoshop so that you can further customize in Photoshop using these layers. Go back over here. So that would preserve the sublayers. And you can also choose to only export the visible layers. So if any of those layers were turned off in the Edit Font tab, then it won't export those when you've got that selected. And finally, it also allows you to categorize to layer groups. And that requires Photoshop CS2 or above. And that will put each letter and its layer effects into a separate group. Each word into its own group with its characters, etc. So that's the output options. And you also have the option to choose the quality of your font scaling, and that's basically going to be a time issue for your render. The best quality will be with line close, but you can also choose bicubic or bilinear. And finally, as with other output from the juicer, you choose the name that you want to give the file you're outputting and the location, which you can choose here. And the usual juicer options of applying this location to all the current batch items or using this as a default for DJFonts in general. So I think that's pretty much it for text formatting options and interface changes for DJFonts, beyond the stuff that we will go over in other tutorials for effects on the layers and for browsing the fonts within the collection. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I will see you in the next tutorial. Take care.